Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Let's Learn This Together. Stick around to the end of the video to hear about the details of my giveaway that I'm doing on every GameMaker video. And what I want to talk about is just how this series or playlist for making a beautiful inventory in GameMaker is going to work and how it's going to come out and what my hope for it is. So if you're really eager and you don't care about this, go ahead and skip. I won't have my feelings hurt. But what I wanted to do with this inventory and with this project was to make it as accessible to as many games as possible. When you start getting into more advanced tutorials, it becomes really hard to actually apply it to your specific game. So I really went out of my way to try and break this up into searchable chunks. So that's why these videos are coming out as individuals, and at the end it'll come out as one long video if you prefer to watch it that way. But my goal is to have each of these videos be searchable for one specific topic, like how to add an item to a DS grid, or how to limit the inventory size of your inventory, the size of your inventory. Each of those subjects are individual videos because sometimes that's just what people need to see. So that's how they're going to come out. And if you don't have the patience to wait for all of the videos, then check out my Patreon where you can get early access and support me for as little as $1 a month. So how this series is going to break down is like this. We're first going to have a discussion about the core concepts of an inventory. That's going to come up next, and I'm really excited because I think it's a really great discussion and I really want to hear your feedback. Then we're going to start working on building the inventory one thing at a time. We're going to build the base code for an inventory using a DS grid. Then we're going to be able to add items to it with one script or one function that you can then use anywhere in your game. And then we're going to start displaying that master inventory list. We're going to figure out how to do drag and drop inventories. We're going to figure out how to use sequences to bring up a beautiful transition for a description of an item. I'm going to show you how to lock down the size of your inventory so that you can increase it or decrease it as you want. We're going to go over how to give every object, every NPC or player in your game a unique inventory so that you're not just using one, because that's really boring and not very useful. And then we're going to go over how to sort an inventory by different properties. That one's going to be fairly complex, but it's also going to be really useful, especially if you have any interest in data structures or algorithms. Then we're going to be talking about that in that video a little bit to give you a good idea of how sorting works and the trade-offs that you have to take depending on the approach that you take. Yeah, that makes sense, right? And then finally, we're just going to wrap it all up, put a bow on top of it, fix any small problems that we might have, and call it good. And then you'll be able to use this system wherever you want. Change the GUI, change the sprites, just modify where you draw things at, and you'll be able to use it in any project in GameMaker that you want. So I hope that's really helpful. I hope you're excited because I've spent a lot of time on this and I think it's turned out really, really well. So give me your feedback, let me know what you think, and that's all I wanted to talk about. So thank you for joining me. Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Let's Learn This Together, and today we're going to have a discussion on the core properties of what an inventory is. For the most part, I just want to talk with you. So that means that if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you disagree with anything or you think that I missed something, then let me know and I would love to hear from you. But we're going to be designing a beautiful inventory. Here is what it's going to look like in the end. And so we're going to be making this inside of GameMaker, and I'm really excited because it is an awesome inventory, probably the most functional and beautiful one I've ever made. And I'm going to share that with you completely for free. You can download the project. The link will be in the description below, so you can just have at it. But before we actually get into designing it, I want to talk about what makes up an inventory. Because if you've played very many games at all that have inventories, you know there are an endless variety of them about what they're supposed to do, how they look, what their functionality is, and everything in between. So how can I make an inventory that will actually be useful to you in your own game? I don't know what you're doing. I'm making something completely from my perspective. How can I ensure that it's actually going to be functional and useful to you? Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here, because even though inventories look vastly different and every single one functions differently, there are things at the core level that all inventories have in common. And here's what I think they are. The first one is to be able to actually see the items that you have in it. That's pretty obvious, right? You need to be able to know what you have. So whether that's through text or pictures or a combination of both, you need to know what you have in your inventory. Now, a game where you don't know what you have and you have to like remember, that kind of becomes the game. So I guess maybe that's the exception to the rule if your game is about remembering what's in your inventory. But for every other game, I think you need to be able to display it. So we're going to be going through and I'm going to show you how to display an inventory with pictures and the text from it. The second thing an inventory has is functionality or usability. Now this is fairly game dependent because if your inventory carries mostly consumable items like potions, you're going to want to have quick keys and hotkeys to be able to use a health potion or a mana potion instantly when you're in a battle or whatever the case is. But if your game is more equipment oriented, you're going to want to be able to see everything and compare stats and know which one's better, which ones are worse, and maybe take your time going through that. But whatever the case is, you're going to want to be able to use it. So I built in a way that we can actually call a script when we're on a specific item. That way you can then use the item to either heal, equip, damage, you can get rid of it, anything like that. We're going to learn how to add items to the inventory, so then from there you can learn how to remove them and use them and get at the effects and the attributes of every single specific item inside of that inventory. A third thing that most inventories have in common is a way to sort them. And that's because in games, you usually acquire a lot of items. Now, there are some standout games where specifically inventory management is part of the game. Like you can't carry too much, thinking like Resident Evil 4 or something like that, where what you have is a big part of how you play the game. But for a lot of other games, they just allow you to carry as much as you want, kind of like Skyrim. You just stack up all those plates and gold coins and useless artifacts that you can find and stuff them in there. But then you want to be able to sort it. So I'm going to show you how to actually sort the inventory that we create, which is going to be a DS grid, and we're going to learn how to sort that by name, by type, by amount, and by price. And the really cool thing here is that those are just attributes that I have given my items, but you'll be able to sort it by however you want. So if your game has specific characteristics to items, which I don't even want to try to guess at what they are, you will know how to actually sort it by those things. Because I'm going to teach you how it works. We're going to go through a sorting algorithm using a double for loop, and I'm going to talk about the complexity and the space-time requirements, and I'm making it sound really complicated, but I'm just going to show you and talk about how it works so that you can do it on whatever items you have in your own game, which I think is necessary when teaching how to make an inventory, because you don't want to know how to sort by my item characteristics, you want to know how to sort by yours. So by the end, you will know how to do that. And then the last thing that really comes to my mind is the fact that you want every character to be able to have an inventory. And that's the kind of system we're going to set up. So we're going to have a master list of all the items you can have in your game, but then you're going to be able to have every NPC, both maybe living or inanimate, have an inventory. So you can go up to a rock, if your game allows it, and you can trade with that rock. You can sell, you can buy, you can do whatever you want, because each object, each instance in your game will be able to have an inventory. And it's going to be really easy to be able to give them that. So that's a really useful thing, I think, as well. We'll have a reference that we go by to make sure that we don't put any items in our game that don't actually exist, but then every character, every NPC, every object will have their own unique inventory, which I think is essential for any game with inventories, because you'll want to trade, you'll want to buy, you'll want to be able to steal, and you want each of them to have unique inventories. So that's what I've got. What did I miss? What do you think makes a requirement for an inventory that's not on my list? Or do you just totally agree with me and I hit it right on the head? I find that unlikely, but I'll take it as a compliment if I did. So if you're excited and you're ready, then go ahead and jump right on in. If you want to follow along, I encourage you to download the Start Here project, which has all of the items, none of the code, just the items and sprites that we're going to be using to save time, so you can just start following me, and by the end, hopefully you will understand exactly how to make your own inventory as I explain why I choose what I do and how to do it, so that you can put this into whatever game project you're working on. Stick to the end for details on the giveaway of my beginner games course. All right, let's go ahead and dive right in. First thing we're going to do is create another object, and we'll create an object. And I'm going to right click, and if you're in 2.3, then you can add objects to anywhere on the asset browser, which is pretty cool. It just takes a second longer to actually find what I'm looking for. I'm going to call this obj items, and what this is going to be is our master item list. So this is going to have every single item we can have inside of the game. It's also going to have all the properties we can have for items. So I'm going to add a create event in here. I'm going to go ahead and full screen this so we can go to work. So this is going to be our master item object. And inside here, we talked about what all items already have. So we're going to go ahead and create that inside of code. So all item properties. The way we're going to be doing it is by using an enum, and we're going to just call this item. If you're not familiar with enums, then go ahead and research that, but for the most part, it's just a way of listing things out with typed numbers. So I'm going to type in something here called like name, and when I access this later, if I were to say item.name, I can do that with this kind of typing instead of having to do it as a string or just put in a number, because every enum is just a number. So this is 0. That's what the first one is, and then the next one is going to be 1, and so on and so forth. We're going to be using these to add things into arrays and DS grids, and so it just makes a lot more sense to use it as an enum. That way we don't have to remember every single number of inside of like where the DS grid and which one the name is, which one the sprite is, and so on. So the item is going to have a name, sprite, amount, a type, a price, the object associated with it, and the last one is actually just going to be for how many properties there are. So name starts at 0, height will be the last number, and whenever we're creating things, we start at 0, but the enums, like when we create a DS grid, it kind of starts counting at 1. So we just max it off at the height here, and that way we just always know how many properties we have. Because if you wanted to add in more properties, if you had them, you just put them underneath the height, and then you'll always have the correct height in your DS grid and arrays, which is pretty cool. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey, and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. Okay, we're going to add another enum here called type. So in this inventory, we're going to have 3 kinds. We're going to have weapon, armor, and consumable. Your game will probably have more, like quest items or something else. I don't know. There's an unlimited amount that you can do. But we're just going to stick with the basic 3. We're going to be able to sort these and have different messages pop up depending on if it's wearable or if it's consumable. So I'll show you how to do all of that as well. Then we're also going to have consumables that can cure certain ailments. So an ailment is a bad thing, such as being poisoned, or if you're confused, or maybe you're drunk. Maybe being poisoned and drunk are actually the same thing. Well, they are the same thing, but for this, we'll say that they are different. Enum sort type. This is going to be used when we sort our inventory. So we're going to be able to sort it by several different ways. Name, amount, type, price, and then same thing here, we're going to have a height variable. So when we are sorting, we're just going to actually be able to say, sort it by whichever one it is, +1. So it'll go from name to amount to type to price. We'll check if we've reached the height, and if so, then we'll go right back to name. You can add in specific kinds of sorting if you wanted to be able to sort by name and then they wanted to sort by price or something. That would also be very simple. I'm just going to make it so you can sort by these and it just cycles through them. Updated it. There are no actual 2D arrays, like it's all 1D arrays inside of 1D arrays, but a DS grid is still going to be a 2D array. And this is how it's going to look. So we have the X coordinates, which is this one here. So 0 is going to be an item. So, and then we have another item over here. And then the Y coordinates are going to be the actual properties that we set up in the enum item. So for the first item, it would be 0, 0 would be the name, 0, 1 would be the sprite, and so on and so forth. That's how we're going to design the grid. Now you can easily design it the other way, but I'm not going to do that simply because I've set it up this way. There's no real reason that I've done this besides I just needed to choose one, and this is the way I'm used to imagining 2D arrays, so it's what I've done. So all of the properties, like the functions we use for DS width and height, if you change this around, just reverse those and you'll be good to go. All right, now we need to actually make the master item list. So I'm going to say global.allItems equals ds grid create. It's going to start with a width of 0 because the width is how many items we have and we start with 0. And the amount of properties, or the height, is going to be item.height. So there you go. That's our all items list. And so this is what we're going to put all of the master items in and check it against. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like when we add an item with a script, but we're going to do that in the next video. The reason for that is I want this series to be as searchable as possible. So this was designing an inventory in code. The next video is going to be adding items to a DS grid. So you'll be able to find that very easily. If you want early access to that, then go ahead and hop on my Patreon where you'll have access to the projects, the videos, and to me to ask any questions. So we're going to create a function called add item to master list. And it looks like GameMaker 2.3 actually keeps track of functions that you've created in the past, even when they're not in there. This beginner project doesn't have any scripts. It does not have this function, but I've used it before, and apparently it remembers even if I deleted it, which is kind of interesting. So it's going to look like this. We're going to add in an array of properties like we did. So the first one, that's why I have this up here to remind myself, is going to be the name. So it's going to be small knife. Then it's going to be the sprite, which would be SPR knife. We already have that. The amount is going to be 1. The type is going to be type.weapon. Then the price, it can be any price you want. I'll put it at 5. And the object is going to be obj knife. We close that as an array, close it up. And then when we call this, it will add this to our DS grid of all items. And we're going to do some checks inside of this function to make sure that what we're adding is appropriate. Because if we were to come in here and add in another one, right here, we have no way of knowing that this is incorrect because we're just passing in an array. But when we actually get into this function, we're going to make sure that we have the correct amount of properties and that everything else is the way it's supposed to be. Otherwise, we'll reject the item because if we tried to add it, then our game would crash. That's going to come up in the next video. So I'm going to create a script, right-click, create script. And I'm using 2.3, so a script here is actually a container for functions. But if you're not on 2.3, that's okay. Just name this script the function that you want to use. I'm going to name this inventory because I'm going to put all of my functions inside of here. And for right now, I'm going to rename this specific function add item to master list. And I'm going to put a description inside of here. Add an item to master list. Now that's kind of redundant, but at the same time, it's always a good idea to get into the habit of using descriptions and parameters, which is what I'm going to add next. So the parameters here are actually going to be attributes. This is the array of attributes to add. And in 2.3, the function works like every other function in pretty much every other language, so we can actually just type in attributes, and that is what we can access. If you're not on 2.3, you just say var attributes equals argument 0, and then we're off doing the exact same thing after that. So I want to show you some safe coding practices, but before I do that, I'll just go ahead and show you exactly how we're going to add this to the DS grid. So if that's what you're here for, you can do it. The first thing we do, though, is look at the size of our grid. Right now, I've created it at a size of 0 because there are no items inside of it. The way that I'm going to be doing this is always adding 1 to whichever one we're at. So we have to resize our grid so that it goes up correctly every time we add an item. And the function we use for that is dsgrid resize. So we're going to resize this, and I am using my DS grid like this. The X, or the width of it, is the items. So I have, this is what it looks like, and the height are the actual properties that we're using. So when we resize a grid, we have to pass in the grid, which is going to be global.allItems. We pass in the width, and this is the new width. So I'm going to say dsgrid width of global.allItems plus 1. And then the width, or the height of it, is going to be dsgrid height of what we currently have, because we're not changing the actual height at all. Add 2 parentheses because it's all wrapped up inside of a function. And now we've resized our grid. Now we're going to actually add to it. So for var I is equal to 0, I is less than array length. And if you're not using 2.3, then you'll use array length 1D. We'll say attributes plus I. And now all we have to do is just map each of the attributes of the array, so each index of the array, to the index of our DS grid, which they should match up exactly because that's the way we have it designed. So I'm going to say global.allItems, and this is the DS grid, and we can actually access a DS grid directly as an array with the hashtag or the pound symbol. And now we're going to always add the attributes to the item that we just resized for. So dsgrid width global.allItems minus 1. So when we made it, we created it with 0 items, so it was not able to hold anything. Now, when we resize, we get how many items it can hold. Oh, it can hold 0, so let's add 1 to that. Now it can hold 1 item, and that 1 item starts in index 0. But when we call dsgrid width now, after we've resized it, it's going to give us a 1, or 2, or 3, or however many items you have. So we have to go back 1, because we just added that 1, to make sure we're in the right spot. But you can't resize after, because you have to have that slot available. So it must be done in this order. Just go back to the one you actually want it at. dsgrid width returns starting counting at 1, but arrays and ds grids start counting at 0. Kind of annoying, but if you understand that that's how it works, then you can get around it. And the attribute that we're changing for this item is just I, because that's what's moving up all the time. So close that bracket and just set it equal to attributes I. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. And that will actually work. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in here. I'm going to open up our room, and I'm going to put the item that we're working on right now, which is obj items, inside here so we can actually watch this work as it goes. So I'll actually put it right here so we can see it get resized as well. So I'm going to hit F6. Now, in here, I'm going to pull this up. Here's our global variable. I'm going to right click on it and view it as a DS grid. That way we can actually see inside of it. So right now, if I try to expand it, there's nothing there. It has a width of 0, and that means that it has no items, like it can't hold anything. But it does have a height of 6. If I press next, now we have 1 item in here with 6 empty slots. So let's go through and add those in. So the first time, you can see over here, here's our attributes, our local variable. 0 is small knife. So attributes 0, because that's what I is small knife, and we're going to place that here. So I click next, and it transmits it over. You can keep going through, and it keeps doing that for all of them. And then when it's done, well, it's done. So now we're all done. And that's it. That's how you add an array to a DS grid. It's with a for loop, and make sure you resize it beforehand unless you created your grid with the proper size. Now, this is actually adding the item. But what I want to also show you is being able to make sure that this functions exactly the way that you would expect it to. So if we comment this out, we forget to make it or anything like that, and then we run this, well, it's obviously going to crash because we don't have that variable. So I want this function to always work without crashing our game. Now, when I say work, I just mean it gets called, and if it works, then it proceeds properly. If not, then it's going to return gracefully and not crash our game. So the first thing we're going to check is, does the global variable exist? So if variable global exists. Hey, there's a function for that. Look at that. We have to type it in as a string, and we only type in the actual name of it, not the global portion. So we're going to type that. If this is equal to false, what I'm actually going to do is create it. So then global.allItems equals dsGrid create 0 and then item.height. And that way, now if it doesn't exist, we make it. So let's check again. Is the global variable a DS grid? Now we know that if it doesn't exist, we make it and so that it is. But what happens if somewhere else in your code, for some reason, you destroy it or you reassign it to something else? If that's the case, and that happens somewhere along the line after you try to add an item to that, then you're going to get an error and it will crash your game. So now we're going to check to see if DS exists, global.allItems, and it's a type of grid. And if it's not, so it doesn't equal that, then we're going to set it to be that. So global.allItems equals dsGrid create 0 item.height. So now, if it gets through here and it is a variable, but maybe it's something else entirely, we're going to grab that and we're going to recreate it to exactly what we need it to be. Now, this might actually cause more problems in your game than it's worth. So you could also comment these out and instead just show a message that's like, no variable found called all items, and then return. So you can try to fix it, or you can just say, hey, something went terribly wrong here. The code that you wrote before you were supposed to write, something went wrong. And then you just return. Return will take you out of the function and not do anything after it's called. So that's actually what I'm going to do here, just to be on the safe side. No dsGrid found. And the last one we want to check is going to be, are the attributes proper? So if what we pass in of the attributes isn't an array, then we've got a problem. And if we try to add it, then we're going to fail because we'll try to access a variable, attributes, which isn't an array. And we don't want to do that. Or array length, and again, if you're not on 2.3, use array length 1D. If the attribute's length doesn't equal item.height, then we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to show a message and then return. So input for adding items isn't right. So we want to make sure that it is exactly the correct size there, otherwise there's a problem. So let's test that out. Let's add a 10 to the end here, And now that's the wrong number of attributes, so it doesn't work and it gets returned, but our game doesn't crash. And that's exactly what we wanted. So now we are able to add items to the master list in a safe way, making sure that it's always going to work properly. And if you wanted to, you could set up a system here where if you call this and none of these properties are correct, you could fix that and then you add it. So different ways of approaching the problem. I'm going to go with the approach that if it doesn't work, then you've typed something wrong in your code, and you probably want to go back and fix that and be told right away that something went wrong. So that's what I'm going to do right here. And that's all I wanted to do in this video. In the next one, we're going to take what the items that we've added, and we're going to add more in the next video as well, but we're going to take all of that and start displaying it in a UI in the inventory that we're actually going to have in our game. Now what we've got so far is a DS grid that we are able to populate with this function, add item to master list, and we pass in some data about that. Now we're going to start displaying some objects, so I'm going to paste in some more. Feel free to download the starter project, which has all of the sprites and objects and stuff that you'll need to get started. It's all just empty for the most part, just a lot of sprites like all of these items and all of these icons that we're eventually going to use, so I wanted to make it really easy to get up and going. If you're using your own, this is where our projects are going to start changing when it comes to the code, because when you're displaying items like we're going to be doing with all of these, that's all going to change based on what you have to actually move around. So I'm going to be putting in numbers that are specific to the GUI sprites, like this inventory that I've got right here. So it's going to be specific to this and nothing else. So if you're using something else, how we display it will translate over, but the exact code will not. First thing we're going to do is just review the room properties. The room size doesn't matter. I've just got this in here. It's not a functional playable game. It's just for the inventory. I've got viewports and the first viewport enabled, and I've got 640 by 480, and so it's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and then the viewport is 1920 by 1080. So it looks like this. I have a 1440p monitor, so it doesn't fill my screen up, but you can see that it looks pretty good, and I like it. So that's what we're going to be using. We do need to make an object here. So I'm going to make a new object, call this obj controller. I'm going to assign it a SPR player sprite just because I can, and then I'm going to put it in here, make it a little bit larger, and now we have that inside of there, so it looks more like a game. And that's really all we have to do when it comes to the room, so I'm actually going to exit out of that. Now, we are going to be using a couple of scripts when we are displaying things, because everything that we display will be able to work with a camera that you have in your game, because realistically you're going to have a camera. So I'm going to make a new script. I'm going to call this camera. Now, GameMaker 2.3 scripts are actually containers for more functions / scripts as you're used to them in previous GameMaker stuff. So name your script whatever you want. For each function I have, you'll need a script. But besides that, not much of a difference. And so here we're just going to say camera X. And all I want to do is just return camera get view X view camera 0. And what this is going to do is just save us a lot of typing, because we can call this script and get this back, which we're going to use a lot. Then we're also going to do the same for Y. Add a space up there. And I'm sure you can imagine what we're going to type right here. View camera 0. And then we're going to do two more very useful ones. Camera middle X. Return camera X, so we can use our own function right there, plus camera get view width view camera 0 divided by 2. Make sure you put the parentheses in the right spot there. Then we're going to do the same thing for camera middle Y. Return camera Y plus camera get view height this time, 0 divided by 2. So now when we need to get in the middle of something or when we need to get the origin of where our camera's at, then we are good to go. And so now when we need to get these, they're very accessible. If you're going to be doing things on the right side of your camera, then you'd probably want to make camera right X and do that. But I don't need to for this, so I'm not going to. Okay, let's go into OBJ controller and add a create event and a draw event, because we're going to need, actually we need a step event too, so let's go and add that. Inside of the create event, we're going to have a bunch of variables that control like how many item slots we have, how far apart they are, and the scaling of all of the items. We're going to put these in variables, that way we can easily change them if we decide to change the resolution of our game, or if you want to start using a different GUI, you can come in here and it just makes it a lot easier. So the first thing we're going to do is make a variable called myItems. And later on in this series, we're going to turn this into our own DS grid, because you're going to eventually want every character, or at least most characters in your game, to have their own DS grid as inventories. But for now, we're just going to set this equal to global.allItems. So it's going to point to that. And again, later on, we're going to add in our own items, and we're going to make a whole slew of scripts to be able to deal with sorting and adding and stacking and all of that good stuff. But for now, we're just going to use what we've already got. The other variable we're going to need is showing menu. We're going to set that equal to false. And we're going to come back and we're going to have a lot more, but for now that's enough. Let's go to our step event. So control menu. We're going to add an if statement inside of here and just check to see if keyboard check pressed ord M, then is showing menu is equal to true. And that way we can bring up the menu. Now when we are showing the menu in our draw event, that's when we're going to draw everything. So if is showing menu, this is where the bulk of our code is going to go inside of our draw event. There's going to be a lot here. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. So the first thing we're going to do inside of here is draw a background so that looks like our game is paused. Here you'd probably actually want to pause it. So you probably actually pause it here, but you know, whatever. We're going to say draw, set color to black. We're going to set the alpha to 0.75. And then we're going to draw the rectangle. So draw rectangle. 0, 0, room width, room height, and false. It's not going to be an outline. We want it to cover the entire thing. And now we're going to come down and draw the back of the inventory. So this is what the inventory looks like complete, and I have broken it down into two. So we're going to have the front, or that's the front. We have the back, which is this. It's the bulk of it, but you can see that there's lots of squares, and that's how their inventory is actually going to work and function. And then we have the plate on top of it. So we're going to draw this one first, and then we can put our items here, and they can fill them up pretty much exactly. And then we can put this over top, and that way we can have our items look like they're rounded, because that's what this is, but we don't actually have to have our item sprites be rounded. So we're going to draw sprite, SPR inventory backdrop, and it's going to be 0 for the subimage, and then we're going to do camera X plus 175 and camera middle Y, and we want it to be right in the middle, so that's all we have to do for that. Now if we give this a run and I press M, well, that's kind of working, except that we forgot to change our alpha back. So I'm going to copy this, put that right there, set that to 1, and try it again. Now our inventory will show up completely, and we have a nice black filter on the back of our game. So that's awesome. Now we also want to draw front of the inventory. So we're going to draw sprite, SPR inventory front 0, camera X plus 175, camera middle Y plus 20. So we have to have that in there because the front of it doesn't match up perfectly. There's some extra stuff at the top. But now if we run it, you can see our front lines up right there. And now we are able to draw everything inside of here, which is what we're going to do. And we're going to draw this. I'm just going to go ahead and full screen this code. And now we're going to draw all of the items inside of a for loop. But before we can actually do that, we need a few more variables here. So we need to consider a few things, and that is the separation here between the items, how many items this can hold, because if you have a different sprite and you can hold, only 4 in each row, but more in columns, then this is going to change as well. So we're going to make this as flexible as possible by adding in some variables here that you can easily change. So I'm going to say menu width equals 6, menu height is equal to 48, item separation is going to be equal to 38, and item scale is equal to 2. And that's what we're going to need for this. Now, the item scale and item separation kind of go hand in hand. So if you change the scale, you'll have to play around with the separation because there's more or less. The item icons that I have, the item sprites, are only 16 by 16, so I'm going to bump them up a little bit and make them look and fill the entire slot there. So now let's go ahead and draw them. So I'm going to do a for loop. I is equal to 0. I is less than our DS grid width of my items, and then plus plus I. Now we're going to eventually draw them in different rows and columns, so we're going to change things up. So I'm going to make it easy by setting some local variables at the beginning of our for loop. I'm going to say var item x equals camera x plus 81 plus, and in parentheses, I times item separation. And then var item y is equal to camera y plus 111. And the sprite we're drawing is equal to my items hashtag I item.sprite. This is how you access a DS grid directly without using its functions. Now we can draw sprite ext. It's going to be the sprite we want. The subimage is 0. Item x, item y. The scale is, we already set, of item scale for both. And then 0, C white, and 1. Now, press F5, and that's really all you have to do to be able to draw them. But we have a few extra at the end here. The reason for that is we have more than we can hold. So what we have to do is add some checks. Check for additional rows needed. If I is greater than or equal to our menu width, and it's less than menu width times 2, then we know it needs to be on the second row. We can add more if statements for depending on what I is and draw them where they're supposed to be. But since we've already figured out we have variables here to show we're supposed to draw x and y, we can just change those. So item x will now equal camera x plus 81 plus, and we're going to do 2 parentheses here, I minus menu width times item separation. And item y equals camera y plus 147. We just need to move them up, down. We need to move them down by 36. Now if we run this, it will work perfectly fine. So there they are. So you can see that we can do that for as many as we want, for as many rows and columns as we need, and that's displaying the items that we have available. Now, there probably is a fancy math way of checking this, depending on what I is supposed to be. If you've got that, feel free to throw that in the comments, but part of what I really want to do in general, but also with this series, is make it approachable for anyone who needs it. So if I had some fancy math formula right here, like it might be too complex for then people to take and use in their own projects. This is very simple. all we have to do is add another if statement here. It says if I is greater than now, menu width times 2, and I is less than menu width times 3, well, all we have to do is alter the item X and item Y by a little bit, and then the third row will then display properly. So the goal of this is to make it so anybody, anytime can use it. And that's all I've got for this video. That's what I wanted to do, is just display an item, display an inventory from a DS grid, and that's what we're doing. So the next thing we're going to do is bring up a fancy transition to show the description and bring up more details on our items. Now I'm going to do that with sequences. So if you have 2.3, which you definitely should if you can, do the sequences. So let's go ahead and come into our project, and we are going to make a sequence. So I'm going to right click and create sequence. I'm just going to name this SQ description animation. And then in a sequence, you can actually put in anything you want. You can do sprites, sounds, objects, then you can replace all of those with in-game assets as it's running. There's really very little limit to what you can do with sequences, but we're going to try and keep it fairly simple here. So I'm just going to drag the sprite description onto the sequence, and immediately you can see that it shows up right there. If it didn't show up, then that's probably because for some reason, when you brought it in, your tracker down here was at a different place than at the beginning. So this right here is our sprite in our sequence, and you can only see it while it is available, while this line is in the right spot. So you can drag it all the way up, and I'm going to put it at 40 frames, and then I'm going to bring this sequence length down to 40 frames. So now, if I press play, it plays for 40 frames, which is what we're going to want. Now, there are several things in here that are good to know. The first one is the actual size of our sequence, which in reality doesn't really matter. Now, our room that we've got in our game right now is 704 by 576, and our camera is 640 by 480. So we don't actually need to change the sequence or the canvas size over here, but I found it to be fairly helpful just so that we can kind of eyeball where it's supposed to be. If we change this right here, now I know I'm eventually going to want this to be closer to right around this side of my screen, because that's where I want it to appear. If our canvas was a lot larger, it'd be a little more playing, like animating it over and over again in the room to make sure it's in the right spot. But if we do this, I know it's going to be pretty close to where I want it. So that's what we're going to do. Now, down here on the timeline, everything is controlled by keyframes. And if you've done any video editing or used any of Adobe's software, then you're probably familiar with keyframes and the power of them. Essentially, it will record a property at a specific frame and then translate between property A and property B when moving between those frames. So, in the beginning, if I set this right here in the middle and I go up 20 frames, or however many I want, and then I move it again, now there's another keyframe right here. And when I go between these, it's going to move between them just like that. So however much that distance is, it will travel 1/20th of that distance every single frame until it gets to where it's going. And you can add as many keyframes in here as you want, and you can kind of actually see them visually in there, which is also really, really cool. So I'm going to Control Z, take those away, because all I want to do is actually move it from the middle here, and at frame 40, I want it to be all the way over here. Now, we're going to do more than just do this, because that's kind of boring, but essentially that's what it's actually going to be doing. Now, we also want to change the scale, or how large or how small it is. So I'm going to come down here and actually add a parameter track. So you can control rotation, color multiply, image index, image speed, origin, and scale. We want scale. Now, if yours is not recording changes, that's because you have automatically record changes off. So you can take that off and then manually add and delete keys. I find it a lot easier to just automatically record them, so that's what I am going to do. So let's go back to frame 0, and on the scale, I'm going to actually come down here and I'm going to shrink this down to 0. So you can either shrink it manually, which you can do, or you can come in and control these properties and set them to 0 to 0. So now it's right there, and it exists, it's just so small you can't actually see it. But that's okay, because we know where it is, and what I want to do is when we get to frame 40, I want it to actually be full-sized. So I'm going to change it back up to 100 by 100. Now, it looks like that. But that's kind of boring. It gets the job done, but the really cool thing is that you can start doing some really cool animations once you figure out how to use animation curves. I'm going to click on the scale, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to right-click and convert to an embedded animation curve. So now, if I double-click on it, you can see that this animation curve, well, it's got properties here of X and Y, which aren't exactly correct. It's actually going to be the scale. So I can rename this to width and height, and that's actually what it should be. And even though you can only see a red one, there's also a blue one here. So that's going to be our width and our height. So now we can change these and add more as we so desire. And this is where the power of it comes in. So this is going to allow us to do really fancy and cool animations just by clicking and not having to do code. So I'm going to add some animations to kind of match this to what I had before. I'm probably not going to be able to get it exactly, but that's okay. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click right there, and now we've got this. And I actually want to change these to be a little bit smoother, so I'm going to click on the curves up here, the curve type, and change it to smooth. And now all of a sudden, we can see that it kind of smooths out, which is what it's supposed to do, and it allows us to play with it, I think, in a little more natural way. So I'm going to give this a bounce. So what I actually want to do is I'm going to scroll up, and this max value right here is 100, or it's what it is naturally. So if you wanted to actually make it larger in the end, you can just bring this up more, but I'm going to leave that there. Instead, I'm going to add another point right here, and I'm going to bring this up a little bit so that when it gets here, it's actually going to be slightly larger than what it was before. And I'm going to click on a point here so that it kind of does it nice and slow, and then we can zoom out and see the whole animation curve. So now if we come down here and I press play, you can see that it kind of does that, and it looks a lot cooler. So we can play around with these and move them as much or as little as one wants. And this is where you can really start getting the power and specific flavors of animation depending on what you want to do and how flashy you want it to be. So this is going to be fairly simple. I'm just going to keep that right there. I think that's totally fine. So now I'm going to exit out of that. So now I'm going to come down here and click on position and right click, and I'm going to actually set this to an external animation curve just to show you this. So I'm just going to create a new one, and it makes it, where does it actually add that? Right down here. I'm going to put this inside of my sequences and just name this AM position. It doesn't really matter. But the power here is that you can create one animation curve just like what we did for this, and you can turn this into a file that then you can assign to really anything else you want. So you don't have to recreate the animation curve every time. You can just set it as its own file. And then if you really like one animation for a projectile or a death animation or something like that, you can just apply that animation to all of them, which becomes really powerful. Now, as an external file, we can actually open it up over here, and it looks exactly the same. There's really nothing different about it. The curve type here starts as smooth, but that's really about it. And then we can add more of them. But I don't actually want to use an external curve right here, so I'm actually going to head and delete this. So then I'm going to click on position. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey, and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. Click on position, right click, and convert to embedded animation curve. And now you can see exactly how it looks. Now, I kind of want this to get here a little bit faster, so I'm going to take my X position and move that up so it gets there kind of immediately. That way, when we play it, now it's already moved all the way over, and so when the Y is changing, it looks like it looks a lot better in my opinion. So that's kind of what we're going for right there. So we've got a 40 frame animation inside of our sequence that I think looks stellar. Now we need to actually put this into our game. So let's open up our OBJ controller and check out our draw event. So when we actually click on something, we want this sequence to appear. So we have to first figure out how we can click on something. And the way we're going to do that is by using the function pointInRectangle. So check if mouse is hovering over an item. I'm going to add some enters here. All right, if pointInRectangle, mouse X, mouse Y, and where we're going to check is inside of our for loop here, and we want to check our specific item. And fortunately, we already have variables for exactly where that item X and item Y is, and we're drawing it at 2x scale, which we already set here. And we know that it starts at 16 by 16, so that means now it's now 32 by 32. So if we want to get all around it, we need to go out by 16 on each side. So for the first X, I'm just going to say item X minus 16, then item Y minus 16, item X plus 16, item Y plus 16. Now, if we are hovering over something, let's go ahead and show that. So I'm going to set our alpha to 0.25. I'm going to set our color to sea blue, and I'm going to draw a rectangle over whatever we're hovering. And we're going to draw it at exactly this place too, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Then we need to add in a false, because it's not just an outline, and reset the alpha to 1. All right, let's try this. If this works, which it should, we can now see exactly what we're hovering over. And now that means we also know when we are clicking on something because we're inside of there. So inside of this whole if statement right here, let's go ahead and clicked on an item. So let's say if mouse check button pressed. So we click MB left, and showing description is equal to false. Now we don't actually have this variable yet, so I'm going to copy it, come over here, and we're going to add this in, and it's going to be equal to false starting out. So this will just tell us when we are actually showing something, the description or not. And, oh, there we go. Don't add a colon at the end of an if statement. So if we click on it, then we want to start showing it. And we made a sequence already, so now all we have to do is just play that sequence. And when we play it, we use the function layer sequence create. And this actually returns whichever sequence that we played. It returns that ID. So we're going to need to store that ID to then check to see like where it's at, how it's playing, and we can also see if it's done playing. Because when it's done playing, that means we actually want to start drawing the item info on that description sheet. So we will say sequence equals, and we need to actually have this be a variable, not just a local one, an instance variable. So I'm going to go ahead and say sequence equals undefined. So it doesn't equal anything to start, and then as soon as we actually do create our layer, it will fill it up, and then we can check to see if it's done playing at that point. So we need to create this on a layer. So in our room, we have instances and we have menu items. What I'm going to do is actually create it on instances because our menu items is going to be drawing stuff over top, so it needs to be on the layer above it. So create it on instances. And we're going to create this right in the middle. Camera middle X, camera middle Y, and then we have to give it that sequence that we have. So SQ, description, animation. Now, an important thing to note about sequences is that when you make it, this right here, and I guess it doesn't get larger as you zoom in, this is the origin of the sequence. So if we move this, the sequence itself is going to play exactly the same, but in our level, now this is where this is the actual X and Y of where the sequence comes in. So I'm going to Control Z that. So if we put this right here in the middle, then it's going to behave properly, and we'll know exactly how it works. If we start putting things over here, it's going to get kind of wonky. So just remember that this right here is the origin of your sequence. So in our room, we're going to put it right here in the middle, and so it should appear on the right-hand side, just like we've set up there. And so now let's go ahead and test this out. We should be able to click on an item and have it show up. Awesome. If you're following along in the downloaded project, you shouldn't have an issue, but I did notice that I have two layers, which we haven't used menu items at all, but for some reason my objects were actually inside of menu items, and that was causing a semi-glitch. So just remember that, and I also forgot to add a draw self at the top here. So let's just do that real fast. Okay. Now we've got that. I think a sequence looks slightly too, like it's down just a little bit too much, but that's okay because we can easily change that. So if I wanted to alter the properties, I can change the animation curve, or I can just come in here and I can move it up. If I've got automatic tracking on, then it's going to move for me. And I can open up that curve and see again right there. So now it looks like that. So if I press play, I still think that looks really nice. And there we go. And if we wanted to make it a little bit smaller at the end so that it's not as large, or maybe it's like a smaller version of it, you can also just come in here and drag these down and it will make it smaller overall. So if we do that, let's try it again. There we go. So now it's closer to the middle of that. It's a little bit smaller, and I'm going to move it down just a smidgen again. Okay, that's our sequence. That's putting it in, and that's being able to actually animate it and get it inside of there, no problem. Now, the other thing we have to make sure of is when we're actually done animating, we want to then start showing information. And right now we have what we need to do it, but we haven't done it yet. And I think that qualifies as part of this video, so let's go ahead and do that. We have our sequence instance variable here. So now we're going to go into our step event, and we're going to check the animations here. So I'm going to say if sequence doesn't equal undefined. That's the first thing you got to check, because if it is undefined and you try to access anything about it, then it will crash your game. So if it's not undefined and layer sequence is finished, we just pass in sequence one more time. So we can check to see if it's finished immediately. And then if it is, then we're going to say showing description is equal to true. So now we'll set that equal to true, and we'll just do a quick show message here as well. We'll just say hi. So we can check to see when it is finished. And voila. And it's just always going to be finished now, so there we go. Okay. So now we know when it's done, but how do we get rid of it, and how do we replay this sequence in reverse order? Because we could make a new one and then start that, but there's also another way of doing it, which I think is actually a lot easier and works a lot better, especially if you want it to reverse animate out the same way that you brought it in. So let's go in, and down here, we're going to check to see if we click on the little X of our can't press spacebar there. If we click on this little X, we want to reverse the animation. Now this is going to be a little tricky because we're going to use the point in rectangle, and although I have a project I'm following from, I probably didn't get the exact X and Y coordinates here, so I got to play around with this a little bit. But I'll also show you kind of how I figure out how to do that, and then you know how to change this up as well really easily. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a rectangle and see if it is right around where the X is at. So I have some properties here, which are going to be camera X plus 590, camera Y plus 30, camera X plus 620, and camera Y plus 90, and false. And the only reason I'm not using camera middle X and Y is because I didn't do that originally, and trying to convert it in my head would take a while. So that is fairly close. I'm gonna bring in the X, let's say about 580, camera Y 35 to 70. And if we do that, that should be pretty close to the X. If anyone clicks up there, I think they're clearly trying to close it, and that will work fine. So I'm gonna copy these coordinates that we just did, right there. Now, we're gonna say if point in rectangle, paste in those coordinates, but then we also have to put in the X and Y. So we're gonna say mouse X, mouse Y. So if we are doing that, if the point in rectangle is equal to true, and if mouse check button pressed MB left, then this means they want to close it. And now what we actually want to do is reverse our animation, our sequence. So layer, sequence, head direction. So this is where this is how it plays. Normally it plays left to right. And there are different play modes here as well. So you can change the playback mode to repeat or to ping pong to go back and forth. But if we did that, then we'd have to manually check to see when we're at frame 40 and stop it. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I want it to stop on its own. And then when we want to close it, we're just going to say, hey, play this sequence again. And even though you are finished, we're going to change the direction from left to right to left. And that means that now it was at the end, and now it's going to be at the beginning of it. And then we're going to just say layer, sequence, play that sequence. And we are no longer showing our description. So we set this equal to false. And that's actually all we have to do. We have to do one more thing to make sure we can play it again. But now if we come up here and close it, it replays it. If we click again, it's finished because it's playing from right to left. And so it's at the end of that play style. And so let's come into our step event. And we need to make two changes here. But we also need to add in a check to say if we are the direction of left to right, because otherwise this variable is not going to be showing up the way it should. So and all of this, layer, sequence, get, head direction. So now we want to know which way it was. For this sequence is equal to the normal one. So if that's true, then we just finished animating in. Otherwise, I'm going to just copy this whole thing and just change this to left. Because if that happened, then we just finished animating out. And we want to say layer, sequence, destroy. So we're just going to get rid of it. We could just go ahead and reverse it back to the other one, but if we destroy it, then next time we create it, it will come in properly. So now, when we run this, we'll be able to animate in and animate out. And there we go. So this is a long video, but that's because I'm also showing you how to use sequences. Once you understand the power of sequences, which hopefully you do now, you can easily create one in just a minute, throw it in your game, and have complex, beautiful, and awesome animations right then, right there. So that's really cool. Now we have this up and running. This is kind of the part of the flashy, beautiful inventory that we're working on. I think it looks really awesome. I hope you do too. And I hope that you really play around with the sequences and get a feel for what you can do with them and how they work. These are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the functions that you can use in sequences. So continue to check that out, play around with it, and have a great time. But that's all I wanted to do in this video. Now we're going to go ahead and create one more object, and this is actually going to be the item parent. So I'm going to say obj item parent, and I'm going to create and all data. So inside of the item parent, we're going to have all of the things that there could possibly have. And that means that there's going to be a fair bit, so I'm going to full screen this. And the things here, I'm going to set to undefined to start. That way, if we have an error, we'll know that we forgot to set it in that specific item, and we'll be able to go back and change that real easy. So something that we're going to want is a description. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy. I'm going to copy this whole equals thing so I can just type out the name. So damage equals undefined, defense equals undefined, health restored. These are all properties that this game's items could potentially have. The more properties and things that you want your items to do, you can just add them right here. I'm not going to cover actually using these items because that's very game dependent, but I'm going to show you how you can set it up so that you can start to use them. So ailments cured is undefined. We can also have things like a speed boost. I don't think any of mine do. I'm just showing things that your game might possibly have. Mana changed, energy changed. And then they're going to have some specific drawing data. So things like our type, name, and price. So these are things that actually get set in our DS grid, and we're going to set them for the item when we create it. The other thing we have to know is if we are in our menu, which is going to be false, and if we should be showing our detailed info, which is also going to be false to start. Now, where we're going to be drawing all of this is on our sprite, which is our description. So we actually need to figure out how much we can draw from side to side. So we want to eliminate a little bit of the edge here and a fair bit of the edge over here. So in our item parent, we're going to have our text width equals sprite get width SPR description, and we're going to subtract 60 from that. And then we're also going to eventually be drawing some icons, and we're going to draw them at 0.4 scale. So I'm just going to put that there for when we do start drawing the icons. And that's all we need for our item parent in the create event. So let's go and actually create some items here. Now, I'm not going to do all of these items because it could take a very long time. So go ahead and do these yourself. I'm going to do a few of them just to show you that they are working. So the description here, specific item attributes. First thing, you need to inherit the event, and then we're going to set them here. So the description equals legendary armor worn by an awesome hero. And then the defense of this is going to be 100. Health changed equals 50. I'm setting it up so that if you want, you can also do like negatives. So if it's something that is a detractor, it would be a negative value, and that would still work totally fine. But the changed value means that it's giving that to you or taking it away. So here, the energy changed will actually be negative, let's do negative 10 because it's so heavy. So actually, yeah, that's all we'll do for now. We don't need to do a whole lot more than that. We might add some more later, or I'll just bring in some objects so that we can do it, but I don't want to waste too much time on that. The other thing is we need a draw event inside of here. Now, each item is actually going to be taking care of the draw event, so we need to put it in the parent, and then we don't want to do anything in the actual specific items. We're just going to have them inherit that. But to make sure that they do inherit it, let's go to item parent, parent, and we can actually just drag all of these into the children category, which is really cool. So now each one will take care of that itself. So let's go back to the drawing now. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. And the first thing I want to do is draw self. Most of the time you're not going to actually see this, but we are going to implement some drag and drop inventory management. So we're going to need to make sure that we can actually see the item when we need to be able to see it. Now, this is info for when displaying description sprite. So if is showing info is equal to true, then we're going to do that. And then we're going to have another one down here, and this is going to be the price, and this is always going to show up when we do this. So if is and menu is equal to true, and I'm trying to format my if statements a little bit different, but I keep forgetting. So this one is going to be the price. So we're going to set the color here to sea orange because they don't have a gold. We're going to set the font, which we haven't actually made any fonts yet. So we're going to have two fonts. We're going to have a smaller one and a larger one. So I'm going to go ahead and create a font smaller. And this is actually going to be a fairly small font because our game window is so small, we're blowing it up a lot. This looks pretty small, but it's going to be totally legible. I'm going to go ahead and choose Mana Space because I really like this font. It's like old retro gamey. It's pretty cool looking. I'm going to create one more font larger, and we're going to choose Mana Space one more time. And this one is going to be size 12. So not a lot larger looking, but it still is a fair bit. So that's the two fonts we need. Let's go back into the draw event. So now we're going to set the font smaller. Fonts matter, makes total sense. Then we're going to draw the text of the price. So draw text, ext, camera x, camera y, plus 390, name plus, and then we're going to say is worth, surrounded by spaces, plus the string of our price variable, plus space gold each. And then we have to, and then we're going to also draw the separation. So that's the whole part of extended. So now we can set the separation, like each line should be separated by how much, and the width. So the separation here is actually going to be font get size of the font we're using times 1.5. Then the separation we're using is sprite get width SPR inventory front minus 20. So not the text width over here because that's going to be for the main description. This is actually just happening on the front of our inventory. Now, we haven't actually created any objects yet, so let's go ahead and move into actually the OBJ controller here. And we're going to come up here above clicking on an item, and we're going to say draw item info. Now, if instance exists, and we have which item it is inside of our DS grid, so we can actually just check to see if that exists. So my items, item.object is equal to false. So if it doesn't exist, we're going to create it and then allow it to draw things. This also takes care of the whole depth issue, which can be a big problem if you're trying to draw on the same layer, which is why in our room we're going to have two layers, and this one is at depth 0 and the instances is at 100. So everything drawn from the items which we create like this, current item equals instance create layer, and we're going to do this outside of the room, and we're going to make it on menu items. That way everything it draws is above the instances layer. We're doing it at my items. The object we're creating is my items, item.object. Now current item here, we're going to make this variable down here, or up here, current item equals undefined. And now we just need to set some of the properties for the item we made so that it knows what to draw. So current item.price, which we set, equals my items, item.price. Current item.type equals my items, item.type. And this will be useful for when we are drawing the button of either to equip the item or to use the item. Now type turns red because it is now a keyword, but it's a constant for when you're using sequences, but it doesn't cause an error when you're doing this. But you should probably change this to something else in your actual project just in case down the road they do make it more of a keyword that you're not allowed to use. So just keep that in mind. Current item dot name is also now a keyword, so you got to be careful with that one too. But I already have it working in here, so I'm just going to keep on using it. So item dot name, and then we just set item dot is in menu is equal to true. And if we are showing a description when we create this item, then we tell this item that we're doing it. Current item dot is showing info equals true. And now we are just about ready to do it. You may have noticed a small mistake I made. I actually put the drawing info for the item parent inside of the obj items. So I'm going to right click, cut that event out, and I'm going to place it inside of item parent where it belongs. And now if we run it, we won't get an error that we're trying to draw a non-existent sprite. And now when we hover over our legendary crystal armor, it's right there. So as soon as we go away from it though, we have a problem because none of the other variables are set on any of the other objects we create. And that's because we need to actually set event inherited on all of these. So event inherited, copy that, just going to come in and place that on each of these so that we don't get a crash. Now, if we do try to draw info or anything else on any of these objects, then we're going to have a problem, but we should be able to come in and at least move around on these. So you can see that it's starting to pile up, and that's because we need to actually destroy the objects as soon as we're done with them. So we come over here, we create them, all of that is fine, but then as soon as we leave, we want to either destroy it, or if we're making another one, make sure that we only ever have one. So right down here, I'm going to say ensure only one item exists at a time. So if instance number of obj item parent is greater than 1, then we're going to destroy all of them. And that is fine because we can destroy all of them, and then we're still hovering over that object that we just created, and it will make it again. So it's totally cool. Now let's try it again. We hover over this, and there we go. So now each of these actually have their own price, and we can see that it's working just fine. And if we come off, we don't have any errors, everything works great. If we bring this up, nothing happens because we don't have any drawing information for it yet. So let's go ahead and do that next. Let's open up the item parent, draw event, we'll go full screen here. So we have it when we're drawing just in the menu. Now we want to actually draw some info over here as well. First thing we're going to do is the name. So we're going to set the font to font smaller. We're going to set the color to red. And then we're going to draw text extended. This is going to be camera middle X plus 60, camera Y plus 120. The name that we have, separation is going to be 20, and the text width plus 15 because it can go a little bit further than the description can. Let's try that out. So we should start seeing the name of the item. Open this up, and there's nothing here. But if we move over, oh, there it is. Look at that. Okay, so it didn't appear right when we wanted it to, and the reason for that is because we are not actually setting that we are showing info on the item that we make the sequence start. So let's go into our controller. So we create a sequence when we click on it, but by that point, the item's already made. So that means we need to actually do current item.isShowingInfo equal to true in our step event. So I'm going to copy that. And at the end, when we are showing description, and so we can just say if instance exists obj item parent is equal to true, then we set it equal to true. Because remember, this actual if statement is going to continue to trigger unless we were to destroy it or make it so that sequence was undefined or something like that. But that's okay. We want the sequence to actually stay there. We just need to make sure that we aren't trying to set something that doesn't actually exist. And now if we run it, it should work exactly the way that we expect it to. We click on an item, and then it starts showing the name. Perfect. That's what we wanted. I think we can move it down just a few pixels, but that looks pretty good. So I'll move it down 125. Okay, now we'll do the description. So we're going to do pretty much the same thing. We're going to set the font here. This time it's going to be font larger. We're going to set the color to black. Then we're going to draw text extended, camera middle X plus 60, camera middle Y minus 75, our description 20, and text width. Now up here, I'm also going to set draw set alpha to 1, just to make sure that these always come in properly. So there's a lot that we can draw in here, but I'm not going to do all of these by hand because I think it's a little bit too much. You can see that these are drawing undefined because we haven't set them, but these are coming in correctly, and I think that looks pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and copy over the attributes and just kind of walk you through them because I feel like it's just too much and it would be a little bit waste of time because once you do one, that's pretty much the exact same thing. So what we're doing on these attributes is drawing a sprite, which is an icon at a place I think called gameicons.net, and they are just really great icons for free. You can use in any of your projects. They come in 64 by 64 sizes, which is why we're drawing them at a 0.4 scale. So we're drawing the icon, and then we're going to draw the text next to it because I think visual indications register a lot faster for a player than just reading a bunch of text. So when we hover over our armor, it is clearly showing that it provides you 100 defense. Now the rest of these don't have anything, but that's okay. We haven't set them up yet. And then we just do that for each one. So damage, defense, health restored, mana restored, and you can keep on adding more. These are all if statements because we want them all to trigger, because they can have multiple properties. The other thing that we have in here is the ailments. So I'm going to come down here. Our items can actually cure multiple ailments. And the way we can set that up is by going into, let's say, the blue jelly. And let's come down here. Let's give it a quick description. Mana restoring elixir. So it can do that, but it can also cure ailments. And what we're going to do is have this as an array, a list of ailments it can cure. So let's just go ahead and give it all of it. So it can cure poison, drunkenness, and confusion. So it can do all of those. You pass it in like that, and then this system goes through. It draws a sprite for each ailment icon, or it shows a sprite for the ailment icon. And then for each one in that array, it draws what it can cure. So let's take a look. This jelly can cure each one of those, which I think is really, really cool. So you can have as many ailments cure as you want, or you can just do 1 or 2. It doesn't really matter. And then the last thing after ailments is going to be the buttons. So we have armor, weapon, and consumable types. So I'm going to draw a sprite right there, depending on which one it is. And obviously you can have a lot more types than that. But for here, you can see there's our equip and there's our use ones. I think it looks like it, oh no, we set up the type already in the DS grid. So each one of those is actually working exactly the way we would expect it to. Now, currently, it's really hard to actually come down and be able to click on this. And if we click on it, it doesn't do anything. But we're going to set that up later to where we can actually lock an item in here. And then we can hover over stuff and it doesn't change it, which then makes it a lot easier to use. But that's just being able to actually draw everything that we want on there. And there you go. That is drawing everything. I know I went over this really quickly, but you'll be able to download the finished project from the description, so you can just grab that and compare it, but you'll probably want to actually draw your stuff instead of mine anyway. So there you go. And that's all I wanted to do. That is the system we're using to display information, and I think it works really well. I haven't really come across any bugs or problems in it yet, so if you do, let me know. Otherwise, I think this works great for any inventory system you want to do to be able to show information from specific objects. Let's go into our item controller. And inside of the draw event, we're actually going to do pretty much everything inside of here. So we've already got a bunch, but I'm going to try and show you just how to do a drag and drop system if that's what you're interested in. So outside of our point and rectangle system is where we're going to implement this. Now, the only thing we have to add inside of here to be able to know which one that we're currently on is a variable current item slot. And we're just going to set this equal to I, because whichever one we were in when we were in this rectangle, this is the one that we're going to begin by dragging over. So that's what we need to know which one it is first. And we don't have that variable set anywhere else, so I'm going to go ahead and say current item slot equals undefined when we start. Okay, now outside of here, dragging system. Okay, we're going to check to see, we're going to use the middle mouse button here as well. So if mouse check button MB middle, so while we have the middle mouse button down, we're going to say dragged item equals instance find obj item parent 0. And that's because we're actually creating our items, and that's how we're actually displaying them as well. So if you're not creating it yet, then I guess you could just draw a sprite over here instead. But I'm actually going to create the item and set it on this. So then dragged item.x equal to mouse x, dragged item.y equal to mouse y, dragged item.visible is equal to true, dragged item.image x scale equals our item scale to make sure it's the same size, and the image y scale, and we're going to set dragging item equal to true. So let's go ahead and create this variable and dragging item here as well. So dragged item will start as undefined and dragging item will start as false. So while we're holding it down, we can move an item around. Let's go ahead and give that a try. We should be able to come in here, and if we're holding middle, we can now move this item around. We do have a slight problem where if we're holding this down, then it actually changes to the next item that we're on, and that's not really what we want. And if we leave it there, it kind of stays. So we have a couple of things that we have to add here. The first thing we have to do is not create new items when we are dragging an item. So up here, when we are creating an item, we want to add a check. So we're going to say and dragging item is equal to false. So because dragging items becomes true, we should now not create a new item when we are hovering over it. There we go. And you can see that the text down here doesn't change, and so that's what we want. Now we've got that, and that looks really weird. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. So we're not creating it. Now we want to, when we release it, we want to change places with an item if we are hovering over an item that we can change with. Otherwise, just reset everything back to the way it was. So we're going to say if mouse check button released MB middle, then we're going to move the dragged item outside of the screen. So we're going to put it to -100 on both of these, equals -100. And dragging item is now false. And we're going to set alarm 0 equal to 1, because we actually need to know which item we are hovering over, which is going to become our current item slot. So when we release it, we want to change the current item slot, get that, and then we're going to use it. The other piece of information we need is which item we're actually dragging. Now we could do a complex script of finding the object index that we currently have, comparing it against our grid, and so on and so forth. but I'm just going to say when we click the mouse button the first time, so mouse check button pressed, so this is a one-time event, which is what we need. The first time we click it, we're going to say dragged item slot equals current item slot. And we don't have this variable, so let's go into the create event and set this equal to undefined to start. Now, the first time we click it, we'll save it, and then when we go to change it, current item slot will be the one underneath, dragged item slot will be the one we're carrying, and we're just going to do a swaparoo, and we'll call it good. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. So let's create the alarm event. I'm going to open up OBJ controller. I'm going to add alarm 0. I'm going to drag this into here so it can be full screened as well. And we're just going to say swap items. And here is where kind of the complexity comes into place. So I'm going to walk you through it as we go along. The first thing we're going to need to do is create a DS grid because we're just going to take all the properties of that item, which are stored in a DS grid, and put it in a temporary grid. So I'm just going to say var temp grid equals ds grid create. It can hold one item, and it's going to be item height because that's what they all are. Then we're going to say save the item we're hovering over to temp. Whenever you are swapping places with anything, you have to have a temporary container for one of them. It doesn't matter which one you do, but because we're going to take one item, place it, and replace it, we have to make sure that we know what the data was for the one that we replaced. So I am just going to save the item that we're hovering over, and then we're going to take that item, put it in there, and then replace it. So there's a function for this when you're using grids, which is kind of confusing, but also can save a lot of time. And that's called dsgrid set grid region. Let's go ahead and take a look at their manual because I think it does a fairly good job. So we're going to go from one grid to another, which is the index and the source. So the index is the grid that you're going to, the source is where it's coming from. And you just set where and how many cells you're copying, and then it will just copy those from the X and Y coordinate you do. So you can see here that we want to copy 6 cells, and we tell it start copying those cells at 1 and 1 over here, and so it just copies those over. Now that's a little confusing, and I still get this messed up from time to time. I have to try it over and over again to actually get it right, but it does save a whole lot of time because you can just do it in one function. So we are going to save the item we're hovering over. So temp grid is where we want to put this information, and it's coming from my items, and we're going to do current item slot 0. So we're starting on the item we want on the X position. We're starting at the top of the attributes because we want to copy all of them. We're staying on that same item, so we're not copying any extra items. And we're going all the way to the bottom of the properties. And then we want to just copy it over into 0 and 0 on the temporary grid, which is the only slot we have available to put something. Now, replace item we're hovering over. So now we're going to do the same thing here, dsgrid set grid region, but now it's going to be from my items to my items. So we're just going to take everything from one item and copy it to a next. So for 1 or 2 steps, or 1 or 2, not even frames, but 1 or 2 lines of code, we're going to have a duplicate item in there. But that's okay, because after we copy it from here, we're going to take the temporary grid we have and copy the item from that. So now we need that dragged item slot that we saved, 0, dragged item slot, and item.height. And this time, we are putting it into the new item, which is the current item slot. That's where we are hovering over, so that's where we're putting the item. And this is why I'm leaving comments, because it took me a while to figure this out just right. So replace item we dragged with item we were just hovering over. Now ds grid set grid region my items temp grid, and this is all just going to be 0, 0, 0, going all the way to item.height, dragged item slot 0. And then we're going to destroy our temp grid because we made it up here, and now we're going to get rid of it because we no longer need it. Let's run this and see what happens. I drag this, and there we go. It replaces those items and it moves it, and that's the drag and drop system that we needed. And that's actually all we have to do. So these are kind of complex, but they do a lot of work for you with just one function, which is really, really handy. So let me see if I can give you a visual indication of what we're doing, and I apologize, it has to be done with my artwork, but I think this will kind of make sense. So let's walk through this code line by line with a visual representation. So the first thing we do is create a temporary grid. So essentially we take this and we copy it and we paste it and we make a temporary grid over here. Now it is completely empty. It's all, well, it all starts as zeros, so I guess maybe it's not empty. But this is a temporary grid over here, and it just is 0 index. So voila, kind of looks the same as the other ones, same height and everything, but there's nothing inside of it that matters. Then what we do is we save the item that we're going into. So let's say we're going to take our sword and we're exchanging it with the cape. So we're hovering our sword, we're moving the sword, and we hover it over cape and we've released. Now we're going to save our cape. We got to save one of them. It doesn't matter which one, but I'm going to save the cape by putting it inside of here. This now becomes our temporary DS grid. So let me delete this. And now essentially this becomes that DS grid. We filled it up there. We've saved it. We have to save it because in the next line of code, we are now taking this sword, copying it, and putting it inside of here. So now we have 2 swords. We've taken everything from there and put it in there. And it is now slot 0, even though you can kind of see the 1. Don't think about that too much. Then what we do is we take this one and then we move it into here. So this now becomes the first slot. So we erase the 0. And it becomes the 1. And that's it. Then I guess we destroy the temporary grid because we make sure we don't want to have a memory leak. But that's what's happening here. We just need to know how tall our attributes are, which is item.height, and we need to know where we need to copy the temporary one into and the one that we're copying to as well. So we're just copying it over and then deleting the original one with the temporary grid that we created. So that's kind of the visual illustration, which hopefully helps a little bit. Using this function, I found you just have to play around with it quite a bit to make sure you get the numbers right. It saves a lot of time though, once you understand what it's doing and how it works. But that's our drag and drop system using just a DS grid, and it works really cool. That's exactly what we want. We can also do it while we're in here, and you can see that the description doesn't change. And there we go. Everything is working perfectly. So I'm going to say function add item, and then I can pass in the arguments right here. So that's going to be the grid and the attributes. And if you're not using 2.3, then you just do something like this. Var grid equals argument 0, and var attributes equals argument 1. Everything else from there on out will be exactly the same. All right, let's go ahead and make sure I've got a description and arguments in here. Just going to paste those there, adding an item, the DS grid, and an array of the item enum attributes. So just like what we've got down here, except this will allow us to add any item to any grid. This function that we already had is only to the master list, and it doesn't check as many things as we are going to check here. So I'm going to first go into OBJ controller, the create event, and I'm going to switch my items, and I'm going to create my own DS grid here. It's going to be 0 and item.height. And then down here, what it's going to look like is this. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this in so we don't have to go through and type it all. But we call add item, we pass in the grid that we want, and then we pass in the array of properties that we've set up already. If you don't understand what I'm doing here, go back to the beginning of the playlist where we actually talk about what the inventory has and then how I designed it so that it works just like this. I've already got sprites for all of these, and I have objects for all of these as well. And I went in and added more information on all of these objects too. So when we actually go into the inventory, you'll be able to see it a little bit better and it'll be totally functional. But besides that, I'm just going to add all of these, and you can see that I can add an amount. So which one is the amount? I don't actually remember. Let's go. Amount is the third one here. So this is the amount. So I'm going to add 1 knife, 1 broadsword, 13 red jelly, and then I'm going to add another knife down here, and that's what we're going to show how to not stack items. Okay, let's go ahead. And where is that script at? Inventory, here we go. I'm going to pull this out and just have it be its own thing. Okay, we're going to do kind of the same thing down here. We're going to be a little bit cautious and make sure that whatever we do, it is going to work. Like no matter what we do, I want it to not crash at all. So that means we're going to do some safe coding practices, but it shouldn't add too much time to what we're doing. So first I'm going to add a local variable called canStack, and that's going to be equal to true. You're going to be able to change this variable based on whatever properties you want of your inventory. I am just going to change it so that non-consumable ones are not going to be allowed to stack. So let's go ahead and get started on our checks. So this is going to be the first check that we have here. Are the arguments acceptable? So this is going to be very similar to what we already did down here. So we're going to check to see if the DS exists first, so grid, and it is of type DS type grid. And if it is not that, then I'm going to show message, no grid found, and return before we try and do anything else. I'm also going to say if our attributes is not an array, so if it equals false, or array length, and if you're not using 2.3, this will be array length 1D. If array length of our attributes does not equal item.height, then we have passed in the wrong number. Wrong attributes. And we'll return from that as well. Second check. Is this item in the master list? So one of the things that you could do to make adding items significantly faster is in the controller, you could just have a script that says like find item and just type in the name small knife, and then it would pull the rest of this out of there, which would make a lot more sense and be much safer when you're actually adding items. I'm not doing it here just because that's one extra step that you don't need. I do cover that kind of adding items in my advanced course, which you can find on my website. But I'm not going to worry about it here because this works good enough for now. But I do want to make sure that when we add an item in, that it is in the master list, because if it's not, then we might have problems later on if we ever have to check that. So I'm going to say var is in master list is equal to false for var I is equal to 0, I is less than ds grid width global dot all items plus plus I, and then if global dot all items, so hashtag I, and we're going to compare the item name here, is equal to attributes item dot name. If we find it in there, then is in master list will become true. And if it's true, then we are good to go. But if it's not true, then we're going to return out of there. So if is in master list is equal to false, show message cannot find this item. And we're going to return. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. All right, third one. This is going to be, can it stack? Now, here's an important note, is that you probably already saw it when I showed you in the beginning, is that some items can stack and some cannot. But what happens if you pass in an item in an amount more than one that's not allowed to stack? Well, you're going to have to actually break that item up for each item it's in there and just call add item again. And so we'll come back and tackle this after we finish this whole script. If it can stack, we'll set it equal to true, and if it's not allowed to, we'll set it equal to false. And the way I'm doing that is just checking attributes, item.type doesn't equal type.consumable. Here you can have any kind of arbitrary requirement for it being allowed to stack, or you can actually add it in the inventory itself, like as a item property, and just check that. So if it's not allowed to stack because it's a consumable, then I'm just going to say can stack equals false. And then fourth check, is it already in the grid? Now this is one that can easily be forgotten, but if it's allowed to stack and it's in there, then you want to put it in. You don't want to just add it in as a new item. So this is going to be, if it's already in there, we will just increase the amount. So if it can stack, then we're going to do a for loop. Var I is equal to 0, I is less than ds grid width of the grid we passed in, increase I by 1, if attributes item.name is equal to grid I item.name. So if we're able to find in the inside of our grid, if we're able to find the same named item, so if you have the same name of items but they're different, this would cause a problem. You might want to come up with some other unique identifiable characteristic of your item, but it's in here, so add one or add amount to item in grid. So grid hashtag I item.amount plus equals attributes item.amount. And then just make sure to put return here, and that will be all good to go. And then fifth check, not in the grid, so add it. Here we just do we do the same thing that we do right down here. We just don't do the global all items, but I'll type it out just in case you're here and you just want to know how to add items. So ds grid resize, we're going to resize our grid that we passed in, and we get the ds grid width of our grid, add 1 to it, ds grid height of our grid. Now it's resized. Now we do another for loop. I is less than array length 1d, array length, attributes plus I, and then we just copied over one line at a time. So grid, ds grid width of our grid minus 1, I equals attributes I. And now we are adding in items in our controller. We've already set my items to here and we're adding it there. That's all we have to do. Let's run the game. And now we have our own items. And you can see that we have 2 knives here. We can move things around. We do have an amount, but we can't actually see that. So let's go ahead and add that in. And that is actually going to be inside of our draw event. We're going to do that here and come on up right after we're drawing the sprite. I want to draw the amount over top of it. So this is going to be amount. We're going to set the color to see white. We're going to set the alpha to 1. We're going to set the font to font smaller. And then we're just going to draw the text at item x minus 16, item y plus 4, and we just draw the amount. So my items, hashtag I, item dot amount. And then let's go ahead and test it out. We should now be able to see the amount, and voila. Here are our knives and our sword, which are not allowed to stack, but we do have one here. And I did mention this, and I said I wasn't going to do it, but I'm going to go ahead and try it. I just want to make sure that my idea is correct. So if you try to pass in something that is not allowed to stack in an amount more than 1, here is what you're going to have to do. First, you got to check to see if that amount is greater than 1. Because if it is, we need to do a for loop. So if our I is equal to 0, I is less than attributes item dot amount, increase I, and then you just call add item again. Now the tricky part here is that you actually have to pass in the array, but you have to make sure you only pass in 1, not just the whole attributes again, otherwise you'll be stuck in an endless loop. So you got to pass in attributes item dot name, attributes item dot sprite, 1 for the amount, because you're going to pass in the correct amount for this for loop. You just pass in 1 at a time. Attributes item dot type, attributes item dot price, and attributes item dot object. And that needs to all be inside of an array. And if we run that now, it'll work. So we passed in 20 staves, and there they are. Now, they're over here because we didn't go all the way when we're drawing items. You can see here that I know how many I'm supposed to draw for the first 6 and then the next 6, but I didn't actually set this up over here correctly. Well, then we got to come in here and we have to set item x equals camera x plus 81 plus I minus menu width times 2 times item separation. Item y equals camera y plus, and each time we just add 36, so it's going to be 183. If we run this, then more of the staffs will show up properly, and as you can see, they are all split up correctly. So there's still more like off screen, and I can keep, well actually, yeah, why not? Let's go ahead. I actually have all of these right there. I can just copy and paste them because we're going to be using this exact same system for when we lock down items. I don't know why there's so many vars here, because we don't need to recreate it every single time. But this will display all of the items properly that you can ever have. There'll only be one slight problem, is that at the end of it, well, we've got 20 of those and 3 of those. That's how many we actually have. Then we got to come down here, and inside of this if statement, right after the for loop, we have to call return so that we don't actually add the one that has that large amount. And that will take care of that. So now we have the ability to add as many individual items as we want, and there we go. The next thing we're going to tackle is actually limiting the amount of items that you are allowed to have. So right now, we can have as many here, but in some games, you can increase your inventory or decrease it based on weight or anything in your game. So I'm going to show you how we can limit the amount of inventory that we can have and how to easily increase it with just one line of code. We're going to tackle that in the next video. First thing we're going to need to do is go into our OBJ controller, and in the create event, I'm going to add a variable. So max inventory slots. We'll start this at 5. Now, however you want to limit the inventory, you need to have some kind of number in here. Our system is actually going to be fairly simple. Because we already have a complex add item script right here, we can just come in and add one more check. And I'm actually going to put it as the very first check inside of here. So we'll say 0th check. That's definitely not how you spell it. 0th check. Do I have space? So we're just going to say if, so every item in your game that is be able to be limited must have this variable name if you want to use this same script. If max inventory slots is less than or equal to ds grid width of the grid we're using. So if our maximum size is 5 and we already have 5 inside of here, we're not going to be able to add any more. So we're just going to say return. And if we do that right away, this will actually start working. And now we can only have 5 items inside of here. But we also want to display that we're not allowed to use them through some way, because otherwise the player might think there's some kind of glitch or something going on. So let's go into the draw event. And I'm actually going to copy this whole thing right here, because we're going to do almost the exact same thing. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole for loop while I'm at it. And we're going to go down here, and before the front of the inventory, I'm going to paste this in, and I'm just going to say locked item slots. So here, the sprite is actually just going to be SPR locked icon. And all that is, well, it's just an icon that I found from gameicons.net. I'm pretty sure that's the place. I should double check that for next time. But it's just right here, and I think it looks pretty good. It fits exactly what I want to do, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. So we're going to use that. This is going to make sure that they're all in the correct space. Now, the only difference is that it's not going to start at 0. This is actually going to start at max inventory slots, and it's going to go until menu height times menu width. Other than that, we just basically do the exact same thing, except we're going to need to draw this at 0.4 and 0.4, because otherwise it's going to be a little too large. So let's press F5 and check it out. And we forgot one more curly brace right there. Do need that when copying an entire for loop. And voila. 0.4 looks a little small, so let's go ahead and change that to 0.5 and try one more time. Now we have locks on everything, and you can clearly see what you're allowed to use and what you're not allowed to use. And to change it, all you have to do is change max inventory slots. So I'll add 10 here. And now we have 10 slots. The items that start making the game of your dreams, then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey, and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. The items that don't get added just kind of disappear. So you probably want to do something more specific with that. And the other thing to think about is if we add an item like this, if we add an item that is actually can be stacked and is adding onto it, well, currently, since we put this at 0th, it'll just return immediately. So we'll actually put it right after this 4th check. So then it becomes the 5th check, and this becomes the 6th check. Now, the reason this will work is even though we are adding items up here, the adding it to the ones that can stack is here, so it has to be after that. And these ones will all get refunded, or not refunded, but they will not work because we actually are going to go through here, we're going to find it can't stack, and we'll eventually hit this before we actually try to add it. So if we do this, we should have 3 blue jellies, even though we added the other 2 after these other ones. So that takes care of that small problem that might arise. And that, I think, is actually it. It's really simple to do. It's just changing that variable and adding in that for loop. Like I said, you're going to want to take care of the items that you can't add, maybe automatically adding some gold to the player or doing something like that. But again, that gets very game specific, and I don't know what your game is like, so I'm not going to try to tell you how that should work. But that's all I've got for you. Super short, super sweet compared to my other tutorials. So if you like this and you want to see more, hit the subscribe, ring the bell, maybe check out the playlist that this video is in for how to create a beautiful inventory in GameMaker Studio from start to finish. And if you want to see more content from me, then go ahead and check out my courses at letslearnthistogether.com. Thank you so much, and as always, keep making keep learning, and I'll talk to you later. So I am going to be adding a function to my inventory script. Now I am using GameMaker 2.3, which just means that my scripts are containers for functions. That's really about it. So if you're not using 2.3, just make a script with this name. We're going to call it function sort inventory. And I'm going to go ahead and press enter a bunch. And I'm going to pass in two parameters here, two arguments. It's going to be sort type and the grid, which actually we've done grid first on all of these. Let's go ahead and do grid and then sort type. Now, if you're not using 2.3, all you'll do is say var grid equals argument 0 and var sort type equals argument 1. And then everything else will be exactly the same. So let's get started on the coding. Now, we've already figured out what kinds of things we can sort by, and we have those inside of our obj items. Come back here, we have sort type. We have name, amount, type, and price. So if your items have more things that you can sort by, then you can obviously put those in and use them. The last one we have is height, and that's because the way we're actually going to sort it is just by pressing the S key. And when we do that, we're just going to say plus sort type, and then it's going to increase it by 1. And if we're at the height, then it's going to go back to the first one. That's just how that's going to work from a technical standpoint, which is why we have a height there. If you're not familiar with enums, they're just names for numbers and they start at 0. Okay. The first thing we got to do is convert our sort type into the type of things that we can actually find inside of our inventory, because the sort type here does not necessarily mean the sort type over here. You could potentially do that if you want, like put name and amount and type and price all in the same order, but I think that's kind of unnecessary and could get very confusing, especially with larger inventories with a lot of different item types. So instead, we're going to go ahead and convert sort type to item attribute. And the way we'll do this is with a switch statement, and we'll just say sort type, and we're going to say case sort type dot name, and we're gonna say sort type then equals item dot name break. Now that should switch to a local variable unless I'm typing something wrong. I've got a colon after case, and it's only after the full case that you want that. Okay, now let's do the rest of the cases. So sort type dot amount, that's gonna be sort type equals item dot amount break. Case of sort type dot price, sort type will then equal item dot price break. Don't forget the breaks, because if you do, you will be in trouble. Last one is the type, sort type equals item dot type break. Okay, looks like we got everything there. It's all coming together. Now, what we've got to do is create a temporary DS grid that we are going to sort, and then we're going to write over our original grid that we're passing in here. And that's because you can sort a grid in place, but there's trade-offs to that. It becomes more complex. And anytime you're talking about sorting or searching and you start talking about algorithms, the two things that you have to consider are space and time, which is complexity. So essentially, do you want to make something easier by using more memory, or do you want to make it more complex by using less memory? Because most of the time when it's more complex, there's more code, or at least the code itself is much harder to read and to understand. But if you use more space, it's a whole lot easier. So we have plenty of space. Writing another DS grid, even for 1,000 or 10,000 items, is not going to take up very much memory. So that's the route I'm choosing to go, and I think it's the smarter route when you are not restricted by something. All right, so we're going to create a temporary DS grid. So var sorted grid equals DS grid create. Going to start out empty. Height, and we also need to know which one is the lowest item while we're searching, And then we also are going to have saved items. So saved items, but GameMaker is kind of strange in the sense that you're not actually allowed to instantiate a array inside of the same time that you give it its name. So I have to do that, and then I can come down here and say saved item 0 equals undefined. These are going to be items we already got from the grid. Okay, this is just going to be an array of numbers. That way we know which ones we've already done. Now, here comes the complex part, is a nested for loop. So the first one is going to be using I. So I is going to be less than the width of the grid we passed in. So we're going to iterate over the grid through our I here, but we can't just iterate over it once, at least not with the sorting algorithm that we're using. We have to actually sort over it every time for each item in the grid to make sure that we've found all of them. So now we're going to say var j is equal to 0. J is less than ds grid width of grid and plus j. Now, be careful, because we've got 2 for loops and 2 local variables with them. So you've got to make sure that j is this for loop and I is up here. You cannot use the same variable, and if you mix them or at any point in this double for loop, it's going to blow up in your face. So keep that in mind. Now, item 1 is going to equal to grid hashtag lowest item sort type. So we start at 0, which is totally fine. We're going to start at the beginning of the grid. Then item 2 is going to be equal to grid hashtag j sort type. So item 1 is just checking the first item that we're at against all of the items as we iterate over the grid. So we're checking j. So we're going to go over the entire grid one time, and we're just going to say if item 2 is less than or equal to item 1, and we need to create another function here. It's going to be array contains saved items j is equal to false. Now let's go in and create this function. I can just do it right here, which is really nice. I'm going to say function array contains, and what this is going to do, I'll actually paste in the description so that you can read it. We just need to know if an array contains a specific number. And the reason we need to know that is when we are sorting through our grid, we don't want to have any you don't want to duplicate an item. Like if we're going through and we find that the third item in the grid is actually the lowest one, but we already saved the third item, then we want to skip over it. We don't want to even do anything with it. So what we're doing is we're saving. We have an array of all the items that we have already copied over, and this function is just going to tell us, hey, that one we've already saved, so don't even consider it. So all we have to do is pass in an array and a number, and this is just going to do a for loop. Var I is equal to 0. I is less than array length of the array, and if array I is equal to the number that we passed in, then we're going to return true. Otherwise, at the end, we return false. And that's all that that's going to do. So it just finds out if there's a number in the array. So up here, if both of these things are true, so item 2 that we're comparing, remember, item 1 is the one that has lowest item, so that's the one that we think is the lowest. And we're going to say if item 2 is actually lower than that, and we haven't saved it already, then lowest item equal to j. All right, now we come down 2 parentheses, so outside of the second for loop, but we're still inside the first one. So end of inner loop. Now we're going to add that item to our sorted grid, because we already have the function written for that. So we add the item to the sorted grid, and that means we have to pass it in, because we don't have an easy function to get all the attributes that we want. So I'm going to say grid lowest item, item.name, and grid hashtag lowest item, item.sprite, and so on and so forth until we get all of them. Lowest, I'm just going to copy this lowest item bit because we're going to do that several more times. And then we need the item.amount. I'll bring it down here for item.type and item.price and item.object. And that's all inside of an array, so make sure you have a second bracket there and a parenthesis for the function of add item. Okay, we add the item there. Now, we're going to add two saved items. So this array that we are adding stuff to, saved items, I, because that's the one that we are actually on. So saved items I equals lowest item. So I is when we're iterating through the array one at a time, and we iterate j amount of times for every I. If that's not confusing, then I don't know what is. But listen to it over and over, type it out yourself, and it will make sense. Okay, so we're saving the saved items to we're saving the lowest item to saved items so that we don't ever copy an item that we already have. Now, find next lowest item. All right, we're going to do for var I, or no, we can't do I, we have to do a different one. Because if we reset I here, it's not going to work. So we're going to do var L equals 0. L is less than ds grid width of grid plus plus L. And now we're going to check the array contains again. And this part is essential, and this is what threw me off when I was first doing it, is I didn't have this in there, and it was overwriting items, and eventually I'd have just the same item. And the reason for that is if we start lowest item at 0 every time, or some kind of fixed number, then eventually that item will always be the lowest, and this will never trigger, and we'll just add the same item over and over and over. So what we have to do is find the next lowest item and set the lowest item to that. So if array contains saved items I, or L, so where we're already at, so the for loop that we're in, if it doesn't contain it, then we set lowest item equal to our L. And then once we got all of that sorting properly and it's all done, we have to actually copy and return. So we're going to say ds grid set grid region, which we've used this before. We're going to pass in the grid that we passed. The source is going to be sorted grid. We're going to start at the beginning, and we're going to go all the way over. So ds grid width of sorted grid, or it could be grid, doesn't matter. We're going to go all the way to the bottom with item.height. And we're going to start at the top left as well. So we're going to copy everything from sorted grid over to grid. And then we're going to destroy sorted grid and return grid. Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. Now I'm going to paste in the description and the parameters for this. And that should be everything that we actually need to know. So sort inventory is only referenced once. That is just fine. It's a function. Now we need to actually implement this inside and start calling it. So let's go back to our controller. We're going to create event. And up here, I'm just going to go ahead and say sort type is going to be equal to 0 to start. Or you can give it a name. So like sort type dot name is also 0, but you can choose any of them except height. If you choose height, that's going to be a problem. Then let's go into the step event. And when we bring up the menu, we're going to call sort inventory immediately. So it's going to be our sort type with my, oh, we switched those around. My items and sort type. And then we can just run this and we have it being sorted by name. So there we go. Let's check it out. We've got blue, jelly, broadsword, legendary crystal, mage's staff. Last one is small knife. Looks like that's working properly. Awesome. Now, inside of the step event here, let's actually be able to add and change the sort based on what we press. So if is showing menu, so we only want to be able to do it while we're showing the menu. If keyboard check pressed ord of S, or any key you want, then we're going to say ++ sort type, and just check to see if we've gone too far. So if sort type is greater than or equal to sort type.height, sort type will go back to 0, and then we call the actual sorting to make sure that we always call it with a valid type. So my items, sort type. Now we should be able to actually see it in action. Okay, I don't see any problems, but the only thing is that we can't actually tell how we're sorting it. So we need to add in a little bit of information for the player. So let's go into the draw event, and at the very bottom, we want to actually do it after we draw the front of the sprite. We want to draw the sort type and let the player know how we're sorting it. So let's go draw set alpha for 1, draw set color for C white, and we're going to draw set the font for font smaller. Now if sort type is equal to sort type.name, and the order here doesn't matter at all. We're just going to draw some text, and that's going to be at camera X plus 50, camera Y plus 425, and we are sorting by amount. Now I imagine I'm actually going to have to change some of these values, but let's go ahead and do this. So now we can do amount, price, type, and just change the actual word. So the first one is by name, amount, price, type. Let's run it. I think it's going to be a little too low or get in the middle of, oh no, that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so now we've got sorting by name, sorting by amount, sorting by type, sorting by price. Let's go ahead and move the camera X in. Let's do like 75. I think that would look better. And voila. We are sorting, we are displaying what we're doing, and I'm pretty happy with that. It's fairly complex, I will admit. Getting a good sort is very difficult to do. This isn't by far the most efficient, and it's probably not even the prettiest way of doing it, but I think it's probably the easiest way to do it, and that's unfortunate because it's still rather complex, but I hope this makes sense. If not, go over it again, or you can check out my Patreon for some one-on-one tutoring if you really are stuck and you want to be able to just talk to me and show me what you're working on, and I might be able to help you out there. So that's what I've got for you today, though. In the next video, what we're going to be tackling is using items in an inventory. Now, I'm not actually going to use an item like in a game because that's very game specific and I'm trying to be as general as possible, but we are going to set up the little system of how to use an item and maybe a couple different ways of going about that. So we're going to go into our controller, and in the draw event, we actually want to add in some code here to lock down the item, draw it red, and make it so that whatever we do, we can't actually change anything else about that item, and then we can actually click on that equip or use button and make it so that something actually happens. So we're going to need 3 variables to do that. I'm going to come down here into our create event, and I'm going to say item locked is equal to false. Locked item X is equal to undefined, and locked item Y is equal to undefined. So this will be where we draw the rectangle, and this will be the actual item that we have locked, or this will be the if we have an item locked. So now we'll go into our draw event, and underneath being able to click on an item to bring up the description and play the sequence, we're going to have this be able to lock an item. So if mouse check button pressed MB right and item locked is equal to false, and we only want to be able to do this while we actually are showing the description. So I'm going to add one more. Showing description is equal to true. Then I'm going to say item locked is equal to true. Locked item X equals item X, and locked item Y equals item Y. And those are things that we're setting up here. So now we have those. And then to unlock it, we're just going to say else if mouse check button pressed MB right and item locked is true. Then we just reset that. Item locked is equal to false. And we can reset the locked item X and Y if we want to, but I don't think it's actually necessary. The other thing we have to do is up here, we are creating objects as we mouse over them. So we need to add one more and to check to see if item locked is equal to false. So if we are not locked, we'll keep making items. Otherwise, we're going to keep it on that one. And that's kind of the key of actually making it so that we don't start showing descriptions of other items. Otherwise, that will happen. So we're just going to come right down here outside of the for loop, draw locked item, and just say if item locked is equal to true. Draw set alpha to 0.5. We're going to set the color to red. And we're going to draw a rectangle, and we already know exactly where to do it. So locked item X minus 16, locked item Y minus 16, locked item X plus 16, and locked item X plus, or locked item Y plus 16. And false for the outline, and reset the alpha. Okay, let's give that a try. We should now be able to lock an item. So let's open up our description, lock it, and now nothing happens over here. So that's exactly what we want. We can unlock it, and we can move it around. So that's perfect. Now what we want to do is set up the point in rectangle function to be able to find the button and then call a script when that's pressed. So we can actually come down here. We can do it anywhere down here, but I'll put it at the very bottom. So press button. And what this is going to do is the same thing that we've already done several times, which is checking the point in rectangle and our mouse X and mouse Y. The actual coordinates here are going to be down near that button. So because I don't know exactly where that is, I'm actually going to turn this into a draw rectangle first. And I'm going to copy in what I think it should be, which is this right here. So these coordinates and needs to be false. And I'll run this and see how close this rectangle actually is to it. So if we load this up, that covers it up perfectly. Might be a little too large, but I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out those coordinates and say if point in rectangle mouse X mouse Y is equal to true and mouse check button pressed MB left, then we'll show a message, button pressed. We'll run that, and that's what we have. Now we can open this up, we can lock this item and move between, and then we can click down here, and that's where you would call your script to then equip an item based on which one you have selected. And you know which one you have selected because that's the locked item. You can easily add in more data about the locked item, so you can just pull it right there, or you can grab it from somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. But that's how you would use an item with this inventory.
Are you ready to start making the game of your dreams? Then head on over to letslearnthistogether.com to check out my trilogy of courses to take you from beginner to expert. Game development is hard and frustrating when you're going at it alone and you don't have anyone to turn to. Join me on the journey and I'll be with you every step of the way to alleviate all of that frustration. And by the end, you'll be ready to make any game you can set your mind to. Go ahead and get started now at letslearnthistogether.com. And that's pretty much everything we need to do. That's all that we have to do for using an item, but if you're following along with this whole inventory, then there's just a few things left. Right now, we can't actually get out of our inventory, so I can't leave it. And then if we open up an item and quit this, we actually still are displaying everything. So let's take care of those few little bugs that we have left. The first one is going to be, actually I think they're all going to be in the step event right here, where we are actually opening this up. So we want to check to see if we are actually have the inventory. So if is showing menu is equal to true, then we're going to do one thing. Else we're going to do this over here. So if we are not showing, or if we already are showing the menu, then we want to close out of it. So is showing menu is equal to false. We're going to layer, we want to destroy the sequence, but first we have to make sure that the sequence isn't undefined, because if it is, then the game will crash. So if it's not undefined, then we'll destroy it. And then if we have any items left, we'll just go ahead and destroy them. It doesn't hurt anything if we call destroy when there aren't any. And that will be just about everything. So now we can go into the menu, we can come out of it, we can open this up, and we can come out of that. And the problem is that this item is actually still displaying stuff. So something strange is going on. The problem is that when we destroy this sequence here, we haven't actually done anything to the item that is actually around. So I'm going to go ahead and say, if we destroy the sequence, then we are going to destroy the item as well. And that should be the last thing we need to do. Let's open this up, exit out, and there it goes. Now it kind of goes away a little late, so I'm actually going to take this and put it where we click on that exit, which is up here. Oh no, that is right here. Exit description. So I'm going to destroy the parent that the item that we've got there, and that will actually take care of that. There we go. And if we come out of the menu, there we go. And really the last thing we have to do is in the step event, when we're destroying the sequence, set showing description equal to false. That should finish it off. If you find anything else, let me know and I can update this, but I think that's it. So now when we exit out, it's not displaying it. We can exit out of it here and it goes away just the way it should. Everything is golden. All right, so that's everything that I've actually got for you. If you enjoyed this video or this series, please leave a like, comment, and let me know by subscribing and ringing the bell if you want to see more stuff from me in the future. Well, that's it. That's the whole playlist. You've gotten to the end, and that's everything I've got for you in making a beautiful inventory in GameMaker 2.3. What do you think? Did you like that? Was it awesome? Did it miss some features, or was it exactly what you were looking for? Here, I would really value your feedback. I want to hear what worked, what didn't, and how I can improve for the future. And if you want a chance to be able to vote on the projects that I work on in the future, check out my Patreon, where they all get to vote on the content I create. So this series, Making an Inventory, was voted on by my patrons, and this is what they wanted to see. So there it is. They also got a lot of early access to the projects, to the builds, and they got to request specific features in there, like being able to limit inventory size was something that was requested on there. But that's what this is. I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope it was useful. Again, let me know what you thought and what I can improve on and anything else you'd like to see in the future. I can't guarantee it, but if it's a good idea, I'll add it to my list and it probably will get made eventually. Just no guarantee when. So thanks for joining me on this journey. Thank you for your feedback and your encouragement. I really do love doing this and I really appreciate hearing from all of you. So, as I always say, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later. On every GameMaker tutorial and video I put out from here into the future, I'm going to be giving away one copy of my beginner game developer course, a great way to go from no programming experience to be able to make your own games. To be entered to win, just like the video and leave a comment showing me your keyboard works. You can leave a comment about anything.
A week after the video is posted, I will send you a message with the coupon. If you want, you can use it for yourself, give it to a friend, or apply it towards a more expensive course by just sending me an email and letting me know that's what you'd like to do. If you want to see more content from me, then subscribe and ring the bell to be notified every time I put out a new video. But that's all I've got for you. So thank you so much for joining me, and as I always say, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later. A huge thank you to all of the awesome people who support me over on Patreon. Their names are on the screen now, and every dollar pledged helps me create more awesome content. You can support me for as little as $1 a month and get access to exclusive perks like my Discord server, your name in the credits, early access to my YouTube videos and courses, and more. Check it out at patreon.com/letslearnthistogether.com or find the link in the description below and become a patron today.